Welcome to Searching for the Question Live. This is episode 24. My name is David Orban, and I am very glad to have you on the show. Before we start, I want to remind you that even if we are live, you can always watch past episodes both on Facebook and on YouTube. And of course, on YouTube, you can also subscribe to the channel. We also have a Discord community, and I invite you to join on davidorban.com/Discord. And finally, if you find the show valuable, as well as the other content that I produce and the knowledge that I share, you are welcome to become a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/davidorban. The title of the show today is Making the Singularity Investable. And of course, we will define what does that even mean. Our guest is Evelyne Pflugi. Evelyne is co-founder and CEO of the Singularity Group, an exponential innovation investment advisor based in Zurich, Switzerland, and the owner of the Singularity Index and the initiator of the Singularity Fund. Previously, Evelyne was portfolio manager and analyst at GAM Investment Management in Zurich and at Capital Research Global Investors in Los Angeles and London. She holds a master's in food science, engineering, biotechnology, biochemistry, process engineering, summa cum laude, from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And you can find her and the Singularity Group on singularity-group.com and on Twitter as Join Singularity. Evelyne, welcome to Searching for the Question Live.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that we used to do on the show as we start, and of course these traditions go way back, like to yesterday, is to actually connect the guests to each other. Yesterday we were in Beijing, China, on practically the other side of the world, as we were talking to Peter Crosby about his experiences in what used to be the first place in lockdown, or one of the first places in lockdown. And today we come back to Europe, in the middle of Europe, Switzerland, the neutral country, independent for the past several hundreds of years, if not 1,000, or forever. And you are in Zurich. So let's start with that. Tell me, how is it in Zurich with regards to the pandemic? Are people in panic? Are people relaxed about it? Is there a lockdown? How serious it is?
Yes, I would say in Zurich, and I can only speak for the area that I've confined myself to, in terms of the feeling that I get. So the Swiss government has advised actually on a lockdown. So they've given kind of an advice, or not really softer rules actually in terms of how to behave in this situation, speaking to the solidarity of everyone, asking people to travel less and to stay at home, basically. And they've put quite some efforts into that. And I think also some financial incentives for companies and entities and people that are affected by that. So that's a summary. In Zurich, I have to say, I think it's changing. So there was a time where I felt more of the fear, and where people were reacting more cautiously, I would say, that was staying at home, and you wouldn't see too much going on. I have to say, over Easter, parts of Zurich, especially kind of the Coop or Migros, where people go shopping for food, were actually, from the outside, from what I could see, reasonably full. So I think there are different parts of Switzerland that I'm in touch with people with are affected differently. So there are some areas, such as Basel, I think, closer to the Italian part, the Ticino, where people are staying at home more because I think they're affected more. They're people closer to themselves, having gone through maybe being infected or even worse, dying from this. So I think in Zurich, I have to say, the community here seems to feel this less from what I've been exposed to.
And of course, it is part of the the unknown around this epidemic and pandemic, why certain areas are so heavily impacted, like Italy and Spain, why others, like Sweden, seem to do quite fine, and Singapore, for example, which appeared to be managing very well for a long time, is now teetering on imposing stricter lockdown measures because they believe they are losing the grip on their own ability to control the epidemic. And of course, it is just one period. Obviously, terrible for those who fell sick and die, and for the healthcare system and the healthcare workers that are exposed to incredible stress and strain in places like the United States, which has captured, I don't think, in an excessive bout of American exceptionalism, the first place in this really sad tournament. But we are invited on a daily basis to understand also what are the consequences of the pandemic in our own personal lives, but also in the lives of our communities and in the business environment as well as society at large. So I'm sure we will have the chance of talking more about that as well. And we have the privilege of having many viewers and viewers who are actively asking questions or making remarks, like Emiliano remarking on the electro seagull of our intro music, or Mr. Khan from Pakistan, I believe, because we have many viewers there who would like to talk about what are the business opportunities. And definitely, we will not only talk in the abstract, but we will try to give an understanding to people of what can they do after listening to us today. So let's start with you, Evelyne, your past experiences, and how did you come to do what you do today?
Oh, I guess, I mean, you can never paint the full picture, but I was a student of science and mainly in the food field, and realized from much of the work that was done there that often I'm very passionate about how food affects everything that we do, our health, but also the world. And I realized actually that the food industry does have quite some power, but isn't always doing the thing that you would expect it to do in terms of health. And so one reason that I felt it was necessary to understand a little bit more the financial angle of things was that many things in the world happen for economic reasons, and where money goes, things happen. Not always, but more often. And so I ended up in the finance industry mainly because I got an offer from Capital Group to move to LA to learn more about finance as a non-financial background person, but ended up doing this here at the Singularity Group by combining forces with my co-founder, Tobias Reichmuth, who similarly to me believes that technology happens everywhere in the world, and innovation is the future and is what drives us to a better place and is the solution for many of the world's problems. And so what we decided to do is try to do something a little differently than the rest of the financial industry, which is try to understand how technology and innovation can create value across every industry and every sector, rather than just the tech sector. And so that was the beginning of a thought process, I guess, on how to better understand how technologies create value, and how to
And of course, the name Singularity Group gets its inspiration from the work of Ray Kurzweil and his books around the technological singularity. So it is maybe worth for us to define what the technological singularity is for our viewers, which is a hypothetical point in the future when artificial intelligence will be able to improve itself and it will become a defining factor in the further advancement of human civilization. At
Yeah.
that point, as a matter of fact, a hybrid human machine civilization. And
Mm.
Ray put that hypothetically, or he expects it based on his analysis to be around 2035 when the first AIs are going to be human intelligence equivalent, and at 2045 when traditionally the date for the technological singularity has been put, that intelligence would be available for $1,000, what we are paying today for our mobile phones. And what is interesting is that Ray actually revised his numbers and he redid his calculations. So the 2035 has been brought forward to 2028, according to his own views. Now, from Ray's experience and book and his meeting with Peter Diamandis, the Singularity University has been born over 10 years ago, that I was also part of as the group of people who originally designed it. And I am also an investor, an advisor, and a member of the faculty. Full disclosure, I'm also on the board of the Singularity Group and a shareholder. So let's make sure that that is transparent as well. Now, you look at all these things. However, you don't wait, and your company doesn't want your investors to wait for another 25 years. So how do you connect the ability of technology to profoundly change the world with the need for businesses to generate value based on those principles already today?
Mm. Simply put, we only invest in companies that apply technologies already and are already creating value. That is opposed to, if you think about it, investing in early stages of technologies where they're not yet able to be applied. So we look for any phase of a technology that is already applicable, that is already creating value, and try to understand how technologies create value. And in a second derivative, try to understand how that shows up in companies' business models. And so with that, actually, I mean, the investment horizon, if you will, that we aim for, I'm an investor in the Singularity Fund as well, is more like a 5 or 10 year, ideally a long-term investment because things keep happening. But by investing in companies that currently are already creating value and that are already making revenues with new technologies, relevant technologies, you should be able to create some returns within a 1 year time frame. And that's what we try to do. Not saying anything else is the wrong way to do it, but we're just better at identifying it this way than other people are better at identifying it earlier, I guess.
So let's define some basic terms because maybe some of our viewers are investment professionals and they are perfectly familiar with what is a stock market index and what is an investment fund. But actually, it could be worth starting from that. So the Singularity Group owns the Singularity Index, which is also marketed through Nasdaq, and Nasdaq very cool. I will ask you who came up. Was it them or was it you? Because they call the index the Nasdaq Singularity Index, and the symbol is NQ 2045.
Yeah.
So I think that's marvelous. Who was it in the negotiations? Was it them or was it you?
Well, I mean, all of it, the NASDAQ Singularity Index is a joint effort that we created with NASDAQ. I think we told them what the Singularity was about, what our thought process was about. And they actually, an analyst on the team that worked with us came up with NQ is basically what has to be in front of every NASDAQ index. And the 2045 at the time was, like you said, Ray Kurzweil's prediction. Seems like we should have made it adaptable, also the name of the index or the code.
So what is a stock market index?
Bah. It's basically, I'm talking about equity indexes now for our purposes. It's a way to,
If you prefer, we can read the Wikipedia definition.
we can do that as well. Um, I mean, we created an index that is supposed to describe or show people a host of a collection of companies weighted in a certain way that are exposed to or benefit from a certain condition. And that's why we called it the Singularity Index, right? But there are country indexes that basically expose you to economic value creation within a country, and the same goes for sectors and thematic indexes.
And as you said before, in order to be part of the index, a company has to be able to show to your analysts that they are generating revenue based on certain technologies
Yeah.
today. That it is not something that they are investing in, so that maybe in a year's time or 5 years' time, that investment will generate revenues, but it is already happening.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that goes
Can
back
you
to
can you make a few examples of what are companies that based on this are or would be in the index and others that are not?
Yes, to clarify, most of the companies that are in the index are also investing in new technologies. So they're not only generating revenues, right? Usually when you've already started to generate revenues, you're probably reinvesting some of the value created into these technologies. But I think, some examples would be a company called Adidas that a lot of people know that produce shoes and sportswear. That is not only investing in new technologies such as robotics, AI, 3D printing, recycled material, but actually has already started to create revenue from that. And that means that the company is already, when you think about technologies and investing, usually when a new phase of a technology happens, a lot of money gets spent, and that is cash outflow. And after a while, sometimes, and not always, and often not, revenue gets created, and with that, value gets created. And the reason we wait for revenue is basically we want to wait for the proof that a business model is able to move invested money into their business model and create revenues. And the second thing that we prove with that is that a technology is viable, that it can happen, and it's not just a dream or an idea.
Yeah, so obviously a company that is innovative and that thanks to that innovation has started generating revenues would be crazy to say, okay, we are done. We don't need to innovate anymore. We don't need to do any R&D. They cannot sit on their laurels. That is the very definition of innovation, that it starts as an exclusive idea implemented in a product or a service.
Yeah.
But even if it is protected through patents and industrial secrets and whatever other means, it definitely tends to spread out. And that is fantastic news for consumers and society, because it means that regardless of who the original inventor was, many, many more people benefit than not just the group that is able to leverage it initially. But the consequence is that no innovation can be an end result of a process that stops, but
Yeah.
it is the intermediary stepping stone for further efforts in research and development and in additional innovation implemented in future products and services.
Mm,
And the companies that have stopped believing in future innovation failed. Whether it is the classical example of Kodak that didn't believe in digital cameras, even if they invented it, or Nokia that thought that 1,000 different models for every niche market, each with its own feature set and keyboards and form factor, would be the future, and they were ridiculing Apple coming out with just a single model
mm,
for everybody that didn't even have a keyboard.
mm.
And of course, these are now examples of companies that used to be very innovative, and they stopped that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, one
when
thing you mentioned, David, you said that obviously companies that have already managed to move a technology into the business model, they won't stop and they'll continue to invest. But actually, that's not so true. There's quite a few also tech companies that did embark on a new technology that at the time was new, but didn't move into the next phase of it and didn't continue to innovate. So we're also
well,
trying to kind
they
of follow
couldn't,
that.
right?
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
that they didn't want to; they were unable, or they
Yeah.
couldn't embrace it. And
Mm,
I'm not saying that any of this is easy, right? Look at Google. All of us look at Google as an example of radical innovation, constant innovation. But
mm,
how many times they tried to create a social network and they failed all of the times. Many of our viewers will not remember Google Buzz or Google Wave or Google. What was the one in Brazil? They had something that was absolutely dominating in Brazil, and in some other countries was quite successful. And then, of course, the latest efforts, which is Google Plus, probably the biggest failure of all, because they tried to force it to people by integrating it in other products of theirs. Like for a time, you couldn't sign up on YouTube if you didn't have a Google Plus account, and
mm,
all of the comments were with the plus sign rather than the at sign. But at the end, it just didn't work, and they closed it down. And we
mhm.
still have many websites with the default social media icon bar that has Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Google Plus,
Yeah.
and it is funny that the world of WordPress default themes hasn't waken up to the fact that Google Plus is gone and dead.
Mm,
So absolutely, there are many examples of companies that are are struggling to invent themselves ready for the next wave.
mhm.
And yeah, Google could die as well. Emiliano says that in a certain way, Facebook is also struggling. And it is a wonderful way to define struggling if your profits go the way that Facebook's profits go. Facebook has the ability of making excellent acquisitions. Many
Mhm.
people don't realize when they say, "Oh, I hate Facebook. I'm all about Instagram," that both belong to the same company,
Yeah.
or WhatsApp as well.
Mm,
And the value that can be attributed to both of those acquisitions is tremendous.
mm,
And as a matter of fact, Facebook often sums the monthly unique users, or the average monthly users in their analysis to all of the platforms, and that is why they say we have 2 billion users, and so on.
mm,
um, but yes, Facebook is not dominating in China, for example, and it could very well fail in the next wave of innovation that is hopefully going to come in the world of augmented reality, where they acquired Oculus for virtual reality visors, and they are launching in a beta version their own multi-user shared virtual reality environment, but there is no guarantee that they will be successful in the next wave, and it is not going to be either Apple or Google or who knows, maybe a newcomer that rather than agreeing to sell for many billions of dollars to the current set of leaders is going to say, no, sorry, we want to fight this out, and maybe they will be successful staying independent and winning.
Mm.
So let's talk about the fund. So one thing is the index, another thing is the fund. What is the difference, and what is a fund, and what kind of fund is the Singularity Group's fund? I'm sharing here once
Yeah.
again the definition from Investopedia what an investment fund is, and they say open end, closed end,
Yeah.
exchange traded funds, etc. So what does this all mean, and where does the Singularity Group stand with respect of these different categories?
Yes, and an investment fund that basically tries to be a vehicle that can collect or pool an amount of money to invest in a group or into a strategy. In our case, it's a long-only equity strategy, so we invest only in the equity of listed companies via a UCITS Lux structure. I won't go further, but it's basically the most regulated long-only equity fund structure that you can find around. And the difference between the fund and the index is really the index kind of tracks this pool of equities that we've put together with a weighting method and its performance on the equity market. But what the fund does is it makes it investable. So without the fund as a vehicle, you have no ability to pool that money to then invest it into the underlying equity.
Because then you would have to perform individually all the movement and the little things that the index is based on. It is just not practical. While you can buy a slice of the fund, you can put in a given amount of money in the fund.
Yes.
However, when you say it is very regulated, in practice, that means that if one of our viewers in the US or in Pakistan says, wow, this sounds cool, can I buy the fund for $10 or $100? Probably they cannot, right?
Currently not. No, we're working on ways to change that. No, there are also country restrictions every now and then. But what you can do is get in touch with us, because what we do is tailor-made investment vehicles if we have enough demand for certain strategies and certain types of investors.
It is always a question of balance, right? The regulators are saying that what they do often or universally is to protect the public because it would be otherwise very easy to lose all their savings. And a more cynical approach to qualify the regulators' activities is that they are in practice through their rule sets giving the message, if you are poor, you are stupid and you should stay poor. Thank you, goodbye. Because in many countries there are these rules that say if you are rich, you are allowed to invest. If you are not rich, we don't even want to smell you. Stay away. What is your opinion? Is this just the communist in me speaking, or is it crazy to believe that regulators should be able to have more faith in the ability to everybody and anybody to emancipate themselves and to participate in a self-aware and conscious manner in investment opportunities?
Mm. I never thought about it that way, actually. But you're right. A lot of the definitions of investors are you become a professional investor more easily if you can tick a box on how much money you have or having a certain amount on your bank account. So definitely that is part of it. I mean, I think there's other things that should be regulated differently. And I believe there are way too many investment vehicles still not really working in investors' interests enough that actually shouldn't be around. So I think we should limit less the ability of investors to pick vehicles, but limit more the amount and the type of vehicles that are available out there. And that way, I mean, you would basically protect everyone, also professional investors, from investing in a vehicle that really isn't in best interest of the end investor. So the regulation should be more heavily on that versus, weeding away a certain type of population or people from investing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Because paradoxically, if the regulators are so good, then they should be able to prevent somebody like Madoff running a Ponzi scheme for 20 years or how long, or they should be able to prevent the prime mortgage crisis, which became almost a systemic risk to the entire financial sector. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that they are unable to do either covers a pretty wide gamut of their inability to prove that the rule sets are working, and that is why and that is why the cynical who are saying the regulators are actually only protecting the interests of the incumbents by making sure that innovation happens as far as possible or as slowly as possible. It should be the regulators' job to prove them wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I maybe haven't been paying attention, but I don't think they tried. Um, the last wave, which I am very heavily invested and interested in, of financial innovation that the regulators successfully stopped, at least for the moment, is of course around blockchain and cryptocurrencies and tokens. Leaving aside the easy criticism of scams and scammers,
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about honest people trying to experiment and see how a given tool set could be applied to the world of investment, what is your position? What do you think? What kind of place blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and tokens play in the near future in your world?
In my world, near future, those two things, I think for now, cryptocurrencies could be a very valuable asset class because they behave certainly in some times differently than other asset classes that investors have access to. And in terms of regulation, I guess some countries do it a little differently than others. I actually like the way that the Swiss kind of dealt with this because they chose not to regulate too much of it. Yeah? So they're not regulating it away, but they're trying to kind of observe it for a while before they impose too much regulation. Although I know enough people that have troubles getting very good and well-informed investment vehicles in the crypto space, getting them online. But I think the problem is still getting the right amount of and the right type of investors really curious and interested enough about it to put some money on the table. But I think as soon as the institutional investors kind of warm up to this topic, I think regulators will find a way to adjust to that, at least here.
What are other technology sectors that you would highlight as having proven to be drivers of value creation through innovative products and services because companies that are now in the index or the fund have employed them? And examples could be, and you will tell me if that is the case, artificial intelligence, digital manufacturing and 3D printing, different kinds of biotechnology or gene sequencing, DNA sequencing. Are these already a concrete part of the value creation of companies?
Yep.
Would you confirm, and what others eventually as well?
I mean, all the ones that you mentioned, definitely we're trying to look at all of them. What we try to do is understand how they show up and in which combinations they create value as well. And what I can say from, if you ask me near term, what is creating significant value or what kind of technologies is the combination, I would say. And to me, one of the exciting areas would be advanced materials or material design, material recycling, because it uses several of these technologies that you mentioned, or it applies to a lot of the areas that you mentioned and to a lot of industries. And at the same time also captures this problem, I guess, we have with sustainability, resource availability, resource recycling, etc. So, I mean, the way I like to think about it is that a lot of problems exist in the world and how we do things and how we go about things, and that most of these technologies are in combination a solution and not as a standalone. So when you ask me, which technology, it's usually every time I'm fascinated about something happening, it's usually a combination of several technologies coming together, and that's what we're kind of more trying to crystallize now. Which areas really propel the combination of several technologies coming together.
You mentioned a crucial point that will also allow us a segue into the second part of our conversation, because it is a theme that is close to your interests as well as your background, and it is that of sustainability. How do the concerns of sustainability correlate with the ability of generating profit based on technology and innovation? Is it an opposite correlation? The more a company believes that sustainability is a value, the less able they are to create profit. Is it neutral? There can be companies that do one or the other, and they can be innovative or not. It is difficult to establish. And specifically, after establishing the relationship between these two sets of concepts, how do you make decisions whether to include or exclude companies, because you may want to create value, but you also want the planet to go on living. And it doesn't matter how much the financial return is going to be if we are all boiled alive in a Venusian atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that the whole idea of sustainability and is about being able not only to survive, but also to thrive in certain environments and to benefit from whatever nature or the world throws at you over and over again. So even if you've done something that worked in the past and doesn't anymore, with the example of Facebook, you might be able to reinvent yourself. And there's an element there of sustainability that you have to have in your business model to be able to do that. And I mean, in line with the bias that I have, that I believe that our approach works, most of the technologies, or actually all of the technologies that we look into, can be used to solve this problem or to make a business model more sustainable, more viable, more adaptable, and more resilient, for whatever they want to do in the future.
While I'm attempting to log into my thing that saves my articles here, because it looks like Bloomberg doesn't want me to keep reading without paying, I don't blame them. I am showing this recent article in Bloomberg that describes, and I haven't read it yet, I'm only seeing the title, that the ESG funds are beating the market, where ESGs are the environmental sustainable or sustainability goals. And that is an interesting result, where definitely I agree with you that people all over the world have spoken. If we wanted to embrace, and I am provocatively and superficially characterizing this, the mortifying strategies of degrowth and all kinds of green messages that have been promoted very strongly too,
Mm.
in 40 years we would have done so, because an entire generation grew up and is now giving birth to a new generation, and we still have not come to grips with the fact that doing what we were told for the past 40 years is necessary. So
Mm.
that kind of strategy definitely failed. And that is why I think today, like you said, it is much smarter and much, hopefully, potentially, I would say necessarily, successful to say you are not only doing this is because it is right, but you are doing it is because you will gain immensely from it.
Mm.
And I
It's the
think the
only way.
best example, huh?
Sometimes because it's the only way, yeah, because you won't survive otherwise.
Well, yes, and I don't know if there is a single company that can say that if they fail, the world will end. But one of the companies that is able to create an enormous passion, almost fanatical belief in their ability to create great products on one hand, have a good financial future on the other, as
Mm.
expressed by their stock price, and at the same time, a positive impact in the world is Tesla, where nobody believed in electric vehicles before them. And even today, so many of the car makers prove they don't believe in electric vehicles by their inability to articulate a credible EV strategy.
Mm.
And Tesla is running the risk of not only being able to maintain its leadership for a very, very long time in EV production and design, but potentially to bankrupt the companies, doesn't matter how famed and admired, that are not buying into the future that Tesla is creating.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thought process because I don't, in the case of Tesla, I don't even see it as a competitive element that is the motivator behind everything, right? Because at least for Elon Musk, or at least from what I get from him, he's not trying to bankrupt everyone else or impose something. He's trying to do what build something that he really wanted to build for the future of humanity, so to say. And I guess his goal wouldn't be to bankrupt the rest of the industry. And I do believe that out of this, most other car companies will take that they can and they should move in this direction, and they might partner up with Tesla or whoever else has a valuable strategy there. And I don't think the whole car industry is doomed actually from this. I think it's an amazing example of how sometimes technology takes a while, or innovation, and especially in this case, a combination of quite a few technologies coming together to propel each other, waiting for a moment also in the world for these technologies to be able to be absorbed. Yeah. So I think it's a unique example with Tesla that doesn't really speak to necessarily the competitive mindset that you normally have in investing when thinking about investing.
So one of your passions is food, and of course, our industrial agriculture practices are anything but sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
They very heavily rely on ample availability of water, which is not necessarily guaranteed in many regions in the world. It relies on our ability to outrun with pesticides the pests. And it is something that we have been able to do, but at the cost of depleting soil and killing desirable components of soil as well, and producing chemical fertilizer that requires a very large energy use, uh, which in turn is relying on availability of oil
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to keep polluting. So even though we have avoided the predictions of the Club of Rome, which in the 60s of last century forecasted that by the 80s there would be widespread famine killing billions of people, and the Green Revolution wasn't an environmental revolution, but originally it was our ability to radically improve the efficiency and the quantity of food production that is now effectively feeding everybody, because the lack of calories in various parts of the world is not due to the lack of food, but insufficient logistics and
Yes.
distribution. So if we realize that regardless of the successes that the sector had, it must radically change.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you believe it is going to be going, and what part of this process in particular is close to you and your interests?
Yeah, and that's why I won't say where it will be going, because I'm not sure it's going in the direction that I want it to go. But I think it should go in the direction of, I mean, one thing that you didn't mention, but we're all well aware of, is that, you know, the reason things are done the way they are in the food industry are not even in interest of humans and their health to a large degree. Yeah? So instead of thinking what should be produced by the food industry and what we should be consuming, I'm more interested and engaged with what we shouldn't be producing and what we shouldn't be consuming and what really is harming us. And if you think about it along the lines of what started our conversation, which was the coronavirus epidemic, yes, who is most affected by this? It's older people, their immune systems are weaker, but there are also a lot of people that are affected by this at younger ages. And I believe, and I think there's some proof for this, is that whoever is younger and is affected by this usually has some sort of underlying other disease. And if it's not a genetic variation, it often is the food they consumed that gave them, be it type 2, diabetes, coronary heart disease, or something else, or high blood pressure. But it's really the food that we're eating, and that is still considered stock food that is supposed to be delivered to us now in these desperate times, is really bad for us, most of it, and we kind of know it, but nobody feels responsible for really taking care of that. So
I like food, and it shows. What kind of food do you like? Because it doesn't show.
no, I think yeah, it doesn't show me yet. That's true, but I think there are healthy ways to still have to enjoy lots of food, sugar, and all sorts of things. But I think we're not made aware of it well enough by the industry. And I also believe, you know, to the topic that you mentioned, there are ways along the agricultural value chain and after food is produced, waste management, etc., that a lot more could be done than is now. That could be pretty easy, you know, and it's not about eating less meat and producing vegan protein, etc. It's really very simple things that very simple existing technologies could tackle. So.
And I don't know if the big agro businesses are part of the Singularity Index and Fund, but is it possible to nudge them towards this direction where they should be able to make money and generate profit and value for their shareholders and the investors of investment funds without creating unhealthy outcomes?
I think that's the only way to nudge them. I think you have to create some sort of monetary investment outcome for companies, and you have to prove to them that applying a new technology and going in a certain direction will come up with reasonably short-term kind of investment returns, and that's what we're trying to work on. Yeah, we're trying to find a way to incentivize the food industry to produce better outcomes for everyone. That doesn't mean, you know, stop producing certain things, but you know, produce them differently and have the health of humanity in your in your mind. So I think there are a lot of ways, but I haven't quite figured out. I think what I'm struggling with, and we're trying to work on this, is politics play, subsidies, etc., play a massive role in the food industry. And so I haven't quite figured out all the incentive mechanisms that have led us to where we are today. I think it's in combination. You tell me what you think, David, with the healthcare industry. That I think the food and the healthcare industry could change a lot of what's happening in the world for a better place, not in terms of just human health, but CO2 emissions and all sorts of problems we have in the world. But I haven't figured out how they should be working together. So,
Yeah, as far as agriculture is concerned, there are many inputs and many outputs, but these can be classified, and then it can be understood how to intervene in order to direct both the use of inputs as well as the generation of outputs in a desirable direction. So,
yeah.
for example, in Europe, we do not need to increase the efficiency of the food production process
Mm-hmm.
because we are already producing enough food. As a matter of fact, it is almost a recurring theme every summer that either in Italy or Spain or wherever else, tomatoes or oranges are rotting on the trees or on the bushes
Mm.
because the cost of collecting them and then selling them at wholesale prices cannot generate a profit. So the food producers are better off not even trying. But what can be done and has been done in many places is to actually invest more money in order to increase the quality of the food. And the slow food movement was born from that. And there are a lot of interesting initiatives that have proven that consumers are ready to actually pay more for food that they are perceiving as of higher quality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another component that I would mention with this regard is the EU Common Agricultural Policy, which is a 7-year beast that is then rolled out and then implemented, measured, and then improved for the next 7-year cycle. And next year is coming out in a new variant. And what is very interesting about it is that it completely changes the way that the member states in the EU are required to charge the growers, the industries involved in producing either vegetables for human consumption or as animal feed, the way that they are charged for water.
Mm-hmm.
Because today it is pretty primitive and absurd. Every farmer is given an allotted amount of time, and then they are allowed, and as a matter of fact, incentivized to take as much water as they can in that amount of time. And it doesn't matter if it is already raining, it doesn't matter if their plants need it at the time, they will take it because then, for typically a couple of weeks, they are not allowed to take more water. So plains are flooded, water is wasted because it goes in evaporation a lot, or actually the plants are harmed because they receive too much water.
Yeah.
And instead, what the new policy is going to impose is to charge farmers as it is logical and reasonable by the volume of water that they are using. And
Mm-hmm.
this will lead to very large investments in technologies that will enable farms to deliver water at the right time, at the right place, and with feedback mechanisms that will produce better plants that are more nutritious, that need less pesticides, And it is expected that water consumption in the agricultural sector in Europe will decrease between 30 and 50%, or even more.
Yeah, what you're talking about is
Giovanni is remarking here because Giovanni and I are actually involved in a project together that aims to give farmers the ability to have an integrated dashboard for managing all the various technologies that are needed here.
I'd like to speak to him then afterwards, because I think, I mean, what you're basically suggesting is, and this can be done not only for water, but for anything, is matching supply with demand. And I mean, we have some technologies that can help us with that, big data, artificial intelligence, etc. You can better, estimate what the demand of anything would be. You can start from consumer demand, given a certain population growth, etc., over a certain time. You can produce less food or more because of that, and you can match your water supply, your seed supply, your fertilizer supply. You can match everything with that, and you can create way more efficiency in the food industry along every step of the value chain by just applying those kind of technologies. So
Are you at EXO World tomorrow, Evelyne?
I am not actually, but tell me.
Well, EXO World is a 3-day digital summit and extravaganza organized by OpenEXO, which is the group created by Salim Ismail, the founding executive director of Singularity University. And I am showing this URL because that allows you to buy a ticket that is way discounted. Not free, which I think is healthy, because with billions of people in lockdown, we have to prove that there is a role for economically sustainable digital events. Not only today, but also tomorrow, right? And we will see if EXO World is a good example, and how to emulate it or improve on what it offers. But I'm also showing it because if you want to meet Giovanni, who lives in Milan in complete lockdown, and you wouldn't be able to meet him in the physical world for some time, but he will participate at EXO World, so you will be able to seek him out among the participants.
Okay.
And the conference goes on for 3 days. I'm speaking on the second day on April 15 at 8 p.m. ish European time, and if you can come, it is on a very cool platform that actually allows a lot of interaction. So you are not just there sitting and watching a video on the screen, but a little bit like we are doing now. You can talk with other participants. There are networking sessions, breakout sessions, exhibition booths, all kinds of cool things that are a digital version of what a physical conference otherwise would be. There are already things that I know I would do differently, like there's no reason to have the 3 days consecutive. The reason we did that in the past is because somebody would fly, and then they wouldn't fly home the day ends to fly back the day after. But now that events are digital, we don't need those days to be one after another, right? It could be differently structured. But we will find what works, what doesn't work. It is a question really of experimenting. So we are at the end of our hour together, and I had a lot of fun. If our viewers would like to get in touch, what is the best way to do that, and what should they do if they want to learn more about the approach that you represent?
Yeah, get in touch. I think for both of those, happy to for everyone to get in touch with me, either via the website and the contact information there, or me, EP at singularity-group.com. I'm very curious about if I don't meet Giovanni at the Exo World, you can get in touch with me this way.
Perfect. Let me display that as well, and our viewers can directly write to you via email. That is certainly a cool way of establishing a contact after an interaction like this. So, Evelyne, thank you very much for being with us today. And I'm looking forward following the adventures of the Singularity Group as well as you directly in the future.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So thank you everybody for following our show. I am going to put my teleprompter for reading the closing notes. Let's see how it goes. Thanks for watching the episode of Searching for the Question Live and for your remarks and questions and opinions. I want to remind you to please join our Discord community to further discuss what are the themes that are covered in our episodes. And if you enjoy Searching for the Question Live, to become a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/David Orban. And I will see you tomorrow at our next episode. Thank you and bye-bye.